So 2 weeks ago was the last time that I spoke, and I was talking about, do you remember this, Jacob's ladder? Remember that whole thing? How long ago was that? It was 2 weeks ago. Actually, it was 20 years ago. Really? 20 years ago, because what we're looking at today is 20 years past that. And I had today's stuff all done before I went on vacation camping for a week. And then I read this book this week. It's a 150-page book just on Jacob's ladder. And it's filled with midrash, Jewish rabbinical ideas, thoughts, imagination from centuries ago about what in the world was that story all about. And I knew I had to read the whole thing, because I knew somewhere in there it was going to touch on what I'm talking about today. And then I ran into a problem. I got too much to say. And so I'm going to get out what I think I need to get out today. But this book is called God Was in This Place and I Did Not Know It. And it's not an easy read. You can handle it. But it is a deep, deep, rich read. And see me afterwards if you forgot about it, or maybe I'll put it on the website today. Deep, deep stuff. So what I want you to do, just to get you caught up from 20 years ago, which was also 2 weeks ago, is last time we were together, last time I was with you, Jacob was running for his life. Because, partly because his dad asked him, "What is your name?" And he said, Jacob said, "I'm Esau." And got his brother's blessing. He stole his brother's birthright. And as soon as Esau was going to connect those dots, he knew the bow and arrow would be out, and everything else he had hidden in a closet. And so Jacob hit the road, and he was running for his life. And as he's running, and our reference point, from Napa to LA, that's how far he had to go. He stayed for the night and still had to be full of terror because his brother's a hunter. And if you've ever been with somebody who really knows how to hunt, they're good at it because they know how to track things. And there's no way that Esau would not know how to track his brother. And so probably as he laid his head down that night, he is in fear. And that's when he has this grand vision of this ladder extending all the way to heaven, which there's incredibly deep stuff there, which we'll need to spend a couple months working through at some time in the future. But that story, which we think is really about Jacob and having this weird dream, is really all about God coming alongside of Jacob and saying, "I know that you're a louse. I know that you're a trickster. I know that you've done all this stuff." God doesn't ask him to confess it. God doesn't say anything to him about that at all. He just says, "Here's what I'm going to do with you, Jacob. We're going to build something with you. You're going to have so many descendants. The whole world's going to be blessed by you. It's all going to be good. I'm going to be with you the whole way. So let's do this thing." So Jacob wakes up the next day. He sets this rock pillow up, pours some oil on it to anoint it, and also to make it clear that this is where this thing happened. And he names the place Bethel, House of God. And he makes his way to L.A. And he's with some relatives there. This is where the story gets weird. You need to read it yourself because it's quite a story. The trickster gets trickstered. So he goes, he falls in love with this beautiful woman named Rachel. She's the younger sister of Leah. And just adores Rachel. So goes to dad and says, "Hey, wow, I am just head over heels for Rachel. What do I got to do to win her hand? I don't have any money right now, but someday the ship's going to come in." I can't really go into details, but I just, he's not going to tell Dad what a jerk he is, right? And so Dad makes a deal. 7 years. Just work for me for 7 years, and then she's yours. That's all right. I mean, I'm so used to this world, I don't even think about how politically incorrect and inappropriate this is. But anyway, look past that. This is a different culture, different time. And so Jacob, so in love with Rachel, just works for her. And it goes by like that because he's so in love. When the wedding day comes, there's this huge celebration. He's definitely drunk, goes into his tent that night, consummates the marriage, wakes up the next day, and lo and behold, he leans over to look at his beautiful Rachel, only to find Leah. A bait and switch. Oh, man. Talk about a trick, right? So goes to Dad and says, what happened? How did this happen? And makes a new deal. So makes a deal that he'll work another 7 years if Rachel can be his wife today. So now he's got 2 wives. He's got a 7-year contract. And they start having kids. He gets a couple concubines on the way. And in 20 years' time, a couple things have happened. He's got 11 children now. Only one of them is from his beloved Rachel. Now, if you remember, when we looked at the story of Jacob a few weeks ago, we know that he is not the favorite son of his father. And so you would think a guy that grew up under a household where he knew he was not Dad's favorite, that guy, when he becomes a dad, you would think he is going to make sure he is even all the way across and show undying love to all of his children. It didn't happen that way. He loved Rachel. And when Rachel finally gave him a son, Joseph, well, it's like he didn't have any other kids. That sets up the story that we're going to start next week. Some other interesting transactions happen. I'm not going to totally fill it, but by the end of about 20 years, he is rich. He's got kids, he's got servants, and he's tired of being in his father-in-law's company. And so in a very sneaky way, he tries to break away. And his dad, father-in-law, tries to catch up with him, strike a deal, accuses one of his people, actually it's Rachel, of doing something wrong, which she actually did, but she was sneaky too and got away with it. And he's making his way on to his homeland to claim his birthright. Once he's there, he gets word that his old brother Esau, the hunter, the guy he ripped off so many years ago, heard that he was coming. How would he not hear that he's coming? You have Jacob coming with his entire entourage. So you've got all of your livestock, which was probably numbering in the thousands by this point. He was wealthy. That's your wealth right there. You're looking at it. It's going bah all the time. This is liquid assets right here. And he's got servants who are watching those. He can't even live in the land where his father-in-law is. That's part of the reason he needs to make tracks. So he's going back home. And when you see that kind of a parade coming, word's going to get out to Esau. So Esau hears it. Well, Esau's done pretty well himself. And so he gathers up some of his men. 400 of his men. Esau's done fine without the blessing. And the only thing that Jacob hears is Esau's coming with 400 men to say hello tomorrow. If you're Jacob, how are you feeling? Scared. And so he does what people did in the old days. He made a parade of all of his stuff. This is what would be done for kings of old when you would come back from a conquest, or if you were a king that was going to bow the knee to another king because you were defeated. You would have all of your stuff before you as if to say to this new leader, all of this is yours. This is my gift to you if you will have me. And so he lines all the stuff from the least to the greatest, from his least cared for servants, newbies, to slaves, to his livestock, whatever. That's all on this other side of the river on the way home. Then he camps with his wives, his concubines, and his kids on the other side of the river. But then, in the middle of the night, he does something strange. You're going to want to look at your text today because you're going to need to circle some stuff as we jump through this. We're going to read through the whole thing. I'm going to come back and I want you to do some scribbles for me on the text. So while all of this stuff is on the other side of the river, Jacob's on this other side of the Jabbok River. During the night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 servant wives, and his 11 sons, and crossed the Jabbok River with them. After taking them to the other side, he sent over all of his possessions. This left Jacob all alone in the camp, which means he crossed back to the other side of the river. So all of his stuff, everything he owned, all of his people, his family, is on one side of the Jabbok River, and he's camping alone on the other side of the river. That's the setup. This left Jacob all alone in the camp, and a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. When the man saw that he would not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of its socket. Then the man said, "Let me go, for the dawn is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." "What is your name?" the man asked. He replied, "Jacob." "Your name will no longer be Jacob," the man told him. "From now on you will be called Israel, because you have fought with God and with men and have won." "Please tell me your name," Jacob said. "Why do you want to know my name?" the man replied. Then he blessed Jacob there. Jacob named the place Peniel, which means face of God. For he said, "I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared." The sun was rising as Jacob left Peniel, and he was limping because of the injury to his hip. So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to go back, and I want you to draw a circle, if you've got something to write with, just around that word alone. This left Jacob all alone in the camp. And the reason I think that's important is because it's interesting to me that when Jacob had his first vision, there was a condition that enabled him to have that vision. And I think the condition that he had that enabled him to have that vision of the ladder, he had that condition again while he's camping alone on the other side of the Jabbok. You know what that condition is? He's afraid. He is terrified. You know what you are when you're terrified? You are vulnerable. Now, fear is not the only way that we become vulnerable. Lots of things can make us vulnerable. Sometimes great grief makes us vulnerable. You know, it's no coincidence that people come into the life of the church, that come in to see me when life has hit the fan. So I'm a very important person in people's lives when they're terrified because they're facing surgery and they want me to come pray for them. I had a person who, on another kind of thing, person who suffered great shocking loss just a couple weeks ago. And I was talking to his wife, and you know what her words back to me were? Knowing that they're grieving the loss of her husband's sister who died very unexpectedly. She said, "You know, I just feel a little better knowing that we're on your radar." Because I'm a superhero. We all know that, right? No, that's not it. It's because she's vulnerable. They are in their grief. And when they're in their grief, they are especially looking toward God. And for her, I am a servant of God. I am a gatekeeper. I am one who is going to pay attention to them and pray for them, and they know that. So grief, when that hits, all of a sudden faith, pastors, the church, when anger, when fear hurts, when divorce hits, when bad prognoses hit, all these things make us incredibly vulnerable. And when we're vulnerable, when pain comes in its myriad form, we find ourselves more able to experience the presence of God because of our vulnerability. Now, the good news is, you don't have to wait for it to hit the fan, for that to happen. In fact, contemplation, which is a form, or meditation is a part of contemplation. The things that I do with you, the deep breathing and all that, when you get into a regular rhythm of that, when you get into a place of openness to the presence of God, really open, you are choosing to be vulnerable in the presence of God before it hits the fan. That's why regular disciplines that allow you to be vulnerable in the presence of God, be it meditation, reflective reading, prayer, whatever that is, that's why those are so valuable. That's also why coming regularly to a service where you're together with people is a good thing to do. Because you are together, so you don't feel as vulnerable, but you're together in this thing, choosing to be vulnerable before God. And so it's no surprise that a lot of the time, somebody will come up to me after a talk or after a service and say, "Who told you what I was going through?" have no idea. I have no idea. And yet some of you today will feel like I'm talking directly to you. Well, that's a God thing. And that's because you're choosing to be vulnerable before God. So we see that Jacob is vulnerable. He's all alone in the camp. And then this very weird thing happens. And a man came and wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. I want you to circle that word wrestled. Because we're going to come back to that in a moment. And wrestled with him until the dawn began to break. When the man saw that he could not win the match, he touched Jacob's hip and wrenched it out of its socket so that it hurt. And we know later on that he's going to have a limp. Jacob's going to have a limp because of this injury that he got from this man who was wrestling. So just out of curiosity, let's find out what you think. Who in the heck is this man who came to wrestle Jacob that night? Any ideas? His conscience? Oh, very good. So, okay, so his conscience. What else? What do you think, Curtis?
Pre-incarnate Jesus.
Oh, a pre-incarnate Jesus. Pulling out the Jesus card. All right. Could be. Yeah, all right. What else? Could be an angel. Okay, what else? Himself, sort of like your conscience, right? Yep. Some scholars say this could be somebody from Esau's camp. One of Esau's guys made it into the camp, and they wrestled all night. You want to know the definitive answer on this from all of the Jewish midrash written about this? You're all right. There's no one definitive answer. And that's kind of the point. The authors, when they wrote this for us to read, they wrote it with great attention. They left some things particularly vague so that you and I would sit around wondering about this. Oh gosh, maybe it was his conscience. Maybe that's what he was fighting on. No, it's probably just Esau. It's just, we don't believe in any of that stuff, so let's just believe that somebody snuck into his camp and they duked it out all night. No, maybe it was an angel. Maybe it was Christ. Could be. That's the point. That's what Midrash is all about, is wondering what in the heck was going on. So the greatest Jewish scholars who might have their idea are going to say to you, we're not totally sure. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting that this guy all night long was wrestling with this person who was there? Now, let's unpack this a little bit, because my thought is that this is some kind of a messenger of God, could be an angel, could be the presence of God, sort of a precursor to Jesus who's incarnate. I think that has some sense to it. But I'm wondering why. Why is there this wrestling match? And what is that all about anyway? Let's think of who we're talking about here. This is Jacob the trickster, right? You're alone in camp. Everything that you have ever acquired, done in your life is on the other side of that river. You can just barely hear everybody you love. You can't hear all of your possessions as they're making their sounds and all that stuff. You're all alone. And it's in the middle of the night. And if you're Jacob, what you like to do in moments like this, when the pressure is on, when your life is, going to maybe come to an end, what do you do as Jacob? You run. You run. I think he was wrestling all night wondering, am I going to run this time? Who am I going to be? Am I going to be the Jacob that I've always been and try to trick my way out of this one more time and hope that my family's okay and start all over again somewhere? Or maybe just walk off to die. Who am I going to be? And I wonder if this messenger of God who comes, if indeed that's what we're looking at, I wonder if this messenger of God is there to provide that constant beacon, that constant pressure to ask that question. Who are you really, Jacob? And who are you becoming? Because you're at one of these pivotal moments that don't come very often in life. This is a whopper. Who do you want to be? Do you want to be the old Jacob, or do you want to be something new? And I think for Jacob, I think for him, he was working it out in himself as much as he was working it out with that guy he was wrestling with. And by the morning, he was still in the fight. He had not given up and he had not gone away. He was going to face the new day. Jacob's a new man. That's why I think it's very interesting that he says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And the man asks him, what is your name? Dumb question here. Do you think this guy who's been wrestling Jacob all night long, do you think he does not know Jacob's name? You think he knows Jacob's name? Of course he knows Jacob's name. He wants Jacob to say Jacob's name. And if this is the presence of God, if this is, as Jesus would say, Abba, Daddy, Heavenly Father, then this is the second time where there's been a vision at the end of a terrible night where Dad is asked a question about, what is your name? The first it was his actual father. What is your name? My name is Esau. I'm a liar. And now he's being asked again by a father. What is your name? And he finally owns up to it. I am Jacob. You know what kind of power there is in that? Because here's what we do. We like to dance. We like to skirt around who we really are and who we've really been. We like to put on a face for others to convince them that the mask is what is actually real. So I can trick you for a while to think that I'm whatever I want you to imagine. It's like my desire is to be the Facebook personality everywhere I go. So that you will think I'm wonderful and I always have wonderful experiences and wonderful memories. I don't want you to know about my interior struggles. I don't want you to know about any of the dark stuff going on inside. So I'm going to keep it like this. But there's no power in that. And there's no future in that. Because as long as we keep up the mask and try to live on the facade, we never really grow into who we are. But there is tremendous power if we finally decide to look in the mirror and see who we really are, warts and all. For Jacob, looking in that mirror meant, I'm a liar. I've been a liar all my life. I've been a hard worker. I've been a successful businessman, but I have not been ethical. I have not been honest. I've come by a lot of my stuff, even my latest acquisitions of goats. I used a sneaky trick to swindle my own father-in-law out of hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of livestock. That's who I am. I am Jacob. I am the heel everybody knows me to be. You know what kind of power is there when you are absolutely honest about who you are and who you've been. There's power in that because now you can see who you are and where you've been. And this constant voice of God is saying, I know. Now let's move forward. And so this angelic being, I wanted you to circle Jacob there, just to note the obvious there, that he's finally saying who he is and all that that means after a night of wrestling. And then after that, this person says, your name will no longer be Jacob, the man told him. From now on, your name will be called Israel. So I want you to underline Israel. That's the first time we see this show up. Because you have fought with God and with men and have won. Now I want you to do something completely sacrilegious. You're going to get away with this, okay? Since it's not in your actual Holy Bible, it's just on this piece of paper, you can feel okay about it for now. But I want you to cross out the word fought. Because the actual translation from the Hebrew, fought is not the right word. And neither is wrestled. The actual word that is best, which shows up in the New Revised Standard Version, is striven. Striven. To strive. Now, if you look up the word strive, sometimes we think of strife and we think, oh, yeah, that's a tough battle. But to strive towards something is not just a passive, I had a wrestling match in gym class that lasted a while, and I did pretty well. It's not a short-term thing, but to strive towards something is to take something from the depth of your being and tap into that resource, because what you want so bad is so important. You know what striving looks like? Striving looks like when a person gets diagnosed with cancer and their doctor tells them, you can beat this, but this is what you're going to have to do. And they look at that list and they say, on it. And their whole life is changed. How they live their life, how they think their life, all of a sudden changed because they are striving toward this new goal that they didn't know they needed to go after. Because of my job and who I am, sometimes I get couples in my office that are on the brink of falling apart. And they ask me, not that I'm a counselor, I send people to counseling most of the time, but if they're just there for a short thing, and they ask me, what do I got to do? And I know their story. Well, one of the things is usually time to go to counseling, individual and together, because you got a lot of stuff to work out. And a lot of times, if that couple makes it, it is because they have chosen to strive together to make that marriage alive and healthy again. That's where you see striving. This is no simple thing, but it's also a positive thing. And that's why I don't really like the word fought with God or even wrestled with God, because it has this negative connotation like God is the one pounding on us, when that's really not it. The whole other way to look at this that we mentioned a couple years ago was that striving with God means that God is right there with us, striving toward the same goal. We have a partner in this God who wants to pull us forward and see us see the dawn of the new day. That's the picture that we have. And that's what's happening here. And so he has a new name, striving with God. And Israel, by the way, I mean, one of the amazing things about our Bible is that it was a new way of thinking about God. It was a new way of doing community culturally as a religious entity that the world hadn't seen before. New ideas about how God shows up that were absolutely revolutionary. And so to strive toward that kind of God, it was going to be striving forward. Because nobody'd written this stuff yet. Nobody'd lived this stuff yet. So to do all this stuff was all brand new. This wasn't the only wrestling match that was going to happen in the people of Israel. This was just this one. Because the whole nation would find themselves striving again and again, cycle after cycle, of understanding it and nailing it and totally blowing it and striving all over again. That's the picture that you have. Let's keep blowing through this. So, your name's Israel, not Jacob anymore. And so Jacob asks him back, please tell me your name. Why do you want to know my name? The man replied. Then he blessed Jacob there, which meant that the fight was over. Jacob named the place Peniel, which means face of God. For he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared. The sun was rising as Jacob left Peniel, and he was limping because of the injury to his hip. So I want you to underline three things. I want you to underline face of God. I want you to underline my life has been spared. And then I want you to underline he was limping. So underline face of God, my life has been spared, and he was limping. So I've told this story before. So why not tell it again? So when I was a senior in high school, this would be November of 1987. I was lifting weights with my good friend Andy in my basement. Basement is a thing in the Midwest. Ask somebody from the Midwest. Anyway, lifting weights there, and my friend and I, we were careless in our weightlifting. We worked out a lot together, but we would never spot each other until the last set, which was stupid, particularly on the bench press. And so I was on the bench press. I had just come off of a show that I was in school, and I was exhausted. And I didn't really know how exhausted I was. And so I was on my 12th rep, I think, of a lot of weights. I think it was like 225 pounds to be very impressed, really. So I was on my 10th or 11th or 12th rep, and my buddy Andy, because it was my first set, he was over figuring out the next track on the stereo, because he wouldn't need to spot me for 2 more sets. And when I was 3/4 of the way up, my arms gave out totally. I mean, they just went out. And all of a sudden, I've got 225 pounds coming straight down. Now it hit me in my mouth, and it cut my lip wide open, and it cut through my lip right here. It was a gusher, let me tell you. And went to the hospital. They stitched me up a bunch, and I have scars that I'll keep for the rest of my life. Sometimes I'm self-conscious about it. Most of the time I don't really think about it. Sometimes, even some of you, and I don't take offense at this, but you've known me for years. And all of a sudden, one day you'll come up to me in the hallway and say, "What'd you do to your lip?" Well, let me tell you a story from 1987. You're like, "I never even saw it before." Yeah, I know. That's cool. Now, for a while, I was very self-conscious about it and hated it because it reminded me that I've got this thing, that I wish wasn't there, a mark. But honestly, whatever self-consciousness I had about my scar was greatly overwhelmed by gratitude. Because that thing could have come down on my neck. And I could have easily died. I could have easily been paralyzed. I'm lucky to be alive. So now when I think about my scars, I think, yeah, well, there's that. I've got scars. But really, I've got life. I'm alive. I have a scar on the top of my head, somewhere around here, from an auto wreck, where it could have gone very wrong. And it could have been really ugly, and I potentially could have been killed. That was about 18 years ago. But I think about that scar, and I'm not bothered by the scar because I have life. So as Jacob walked around with a limp the rest of his life, and I'm sure there were days that caused him pain, I guarantee you that he saw through the pain because he saw the face of God and did not die. And his limp reminded him, even in the pain, I am feeling the pain of my hip, which means I am alive. Sometimes the pain that we have in our lives is a good one. This one was a good thing. Now, two final things, and then I'm going to let you off the hook for today. The first thing is really an interesting note here that one of the Jewish rabbis of old pointed out. So you notice that we read here, "Why do you want to know my name?" the man replied. Then he blessed Jacob there, and then he went back up that stairway to heaven. Does it say that there in the text, that he went back up the stairway? No, it doesn't. In fact, it doesn't say anything about this guy leaving Jacob at all. And so there are some rabbis that look at this and they're like, the guy never left. He stayed with Jacob. Almost as if the very presence of God, first of all, had never left Jacob, and now was with him as he was going to face his brother. I've never let you go, Jacob. You've never been alone, even though you thought you were. And now as you leave this camp and you cross over the river, by the way, a really cool little extra bonus thing for you to impress your nerdy Bible friends, is Hebrew, one of the renderings of the word Hebrew is not just from a geographical place, but it means the crossover people. Because the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, were known for crossing over rivers in their journey. And so you've got Jacob, Israel, the new leader of the crossover people, with the help of God, crossing over this river for the new day to meet his brother. Profound stuff. And he's not alone. He's with somebody. But the other thing I wanted to talk about was this, about striving toward Heneni. Can you say Heneni? Heneni. Striving toward Heneni. Heneni is not a place. It's actually a Hebrew word. This is the second vision that Jacob had. He had 3. In the third, we see Heneni. And we're not going to spend any time on the third, but I want to tell you about Heneni. Because in the first vision with the ladder, Jacob was terrified. He didn't even know God was around. And finds out God was there, and he names the place Bethel, place of God. And then the second one, he's terrified because he knows he's going to meet his brother and may lose his life and his family and all of his stuff, and it's going to be hell. And God was with him and blessed him and was not going to let him go in all of the good kinds of ways that means. The third time he has a vision from God, when he knows God is showing up again in a dream, even though he's anxious about what he's got to do with his people, he's got to make a big decision. Do we stay where we are in what we would call the Holy Land, or Israel, or do we take everything that we have, our entire family, our entire clan, and do we move everything to Egypt, which is what he did? Big, major decision. But here's the difference. As soon as Jacob heard his name from the voice of God saying, Jacob, wake up. You know what Jacob's response was? Heneni. You know what Heneni means? Here am I. It only shows up a handful of times in all of the Old Testament. And this time, you don't have a guy who doesn't even know God exists. You don't have a guy who wrestles through the night. But you got a guy who is mature to a level that when he hears the voice of God say, Jacob, his response is, Heneni! Heneni! I'm not going to miss out on this. Here I am. What do you want to do? And my question to you is, what are you going to do? And are you going to wait until your life is almost over for you to finally say, Heneni? Because what would have been different if Jacob, that very first night, when he saw the ladder vision, what would have been different for all the people that he was with if he would have said Heneni from the beginning? And some of you are here today, and you've been going through different seasons of life, and you've been wrestling with God, but you tend to go back. And you find yourselves on the wrong side of the river because you're too afraid or you're too complacent or whatever the case may be. You're not quite sure if you can trust the nature of God. And yet Jacob's experience, by the time he was an old man, he knew with confidence that the next time he was going to hear, Jacob, wake up, his response had to be, Heneni is your response. Heneni. Don't you know that you can trust the face of God? That even if you've been a louse and you're running for your life in who knows how many ways, and you think God is going to wipe you out, that God comes alongside you and says, hey, let's talk about what I want to do with you. Because I'm not here to kick your butt. I'm here to lift you up. I want your life to sing. Why would I want to ruin your life? Let's improve this thing. Let's move forward. And when you're wrestling, wanting to know if you should go face your greatest fears of your life, God is not there to smite you and say, well, you big jerk, you're finally going to have to face the music. You deserve everything that's coming to you in the morning. That's not it at all. But God comes alongside, wakes us up, wrestles with us to struggle this thing out. Who do you want to be? That's the character and nature of God that you build your life on. So that when the next moment comes and you know before you, this is the thing that God wants me to do. This is who God wants me to be. Your response is what? Your response is what? Heneni. Your response is what? Heneni. That is your calling. Is it what your response is to God? Let's pray together. May it be Heneni, God. May it be Heneni. And if it's not Heneni, if it's not here I am, I can totally trust you, God. And God, can you help us? I know you do. I know that you're already going to strive with us. But can you remind us that you're with us? And can you give us the discipline? Can you give us the bandwidth? Can you give us the time? Can you raise you and who you are higher in our priority list so we can sort out the stuff that's kept us from saying Heneni to this point? And maybe if it's us, God, maybe if we've been lying to ourselves about who we are, can you come alongside of us and say, let's look at the mirror together. I have no desire to judge you. I have no desire to condemn you. Why would I want to do that? But I do want to restore you. I'll stand beside you and let's look together at who you've become. And let's strive together toward a beautiful thing. Can you help us with that, God? Can you help us sort out our twisted theology that turns you into this cruel, horrible dictator that just wants to smite us? And can you give us the confidence and the strength to look at ourselves clearly, knowing that you want to call us forward, so that one day, if not today, one day we can say with confidence, Heneni, May we be your Heneni people that see you, experience you, acknowledge you, and cannot help but say, here am I. And may you be glorified and lifted up because we do. We ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.